A few days ago, the Red Wings Boeing 777 returned to Moscow after the crew received a fire warning on the left engine. It was an unusual event, and as often happens after any Boeing-related headline, one familiar phrase immediately resurfaced across social media. If it's Boeing, I'm not going. Now, that reaction comes from a very real place. The 737 MAX tragedies left a deep mark on public trust, and whenever the word Boeing appears next to the word incident, many people assume it's the same kind of story all over again. But the situation we saw over Moscow is not that kind of event at all. In fact, what triggered that fire warning sits in a completely different category of failure. So today, let's break down why this particular case doesn't fit the narrative people are attaching to it, and why this event doesn't move the needle on the 777's safety. This is William, and welcome to BlackboxAnalyst. Let's have a look. Before we talk about the Red Wings case, we need to acknowledge where this emotional reaction comes from. Aviation enthusiasts know this well, but for many viewers, everything began with two tragic flights: Lion Air 610 in 2018 and Ethiopian Airlines 302 inches 2019. Both were Boeing 737 MAX 8 aircraft, and both crashed shortly after takeoff due to a design flaw inside a system called MCAS. 346 people lost their lives. Families were devastated. The aviation world was shocked. Boeing's reputation suffered a massive blow, and rightly so. This was not an engine failure. It wasn't a maintenance oversight. It was a Boeing aircraft-level design issue, made worse by poor documentation and inadequate pilot training requirements. The result was a global grounding of the MAX and a long process of redesign, recertification, and rebuilding trust. And even after the redesign, public confidence hasn't fully recovered. Every time something with a Boeing logo appears in the news, even if it's unrelated, that old anxiety resurfaces. We saw that earlier this year with the Alaska Airlines MAX 9 door plug failure. No one died, thankfully, but it was dramatic enough to bring back all of those memories, all of those headlines, and all of that fear. So when viewers see Boeing 777 and fire warning in the same sentence, it's completely understandable that their minds go straight to that phrase: if it's Boeing, I'm not going. The problem is that the Red Wings incident is not another MAX situation, not even close. And once we understand what actually occurred, that becomes very clear. Red Wings flight RWZ 3097 departed Moscow Domodedovo bound for Turkey. Shortly after takeoff, the crew received a fire warning on the left engine. Now, a fire warning is a very specific thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have flames shooting out of the engine. It means that the temperature inside the engine nacelle has risen to a level that triggers the detection loop. It could be a real fire, a bleed air leak, a faulty sensor, or even a damaged insulation blanket. But in the cockpit, the logic is simple. Treat it as a real fire until proven otherwise. And that's exactly what the crew did. They stopped the climb, leveled off, and prepared to return. The aircraft landed safely back at Domodedovo. The passengers disembarked normally, and from a pilot's perspective, that is a successful outcome. The system, both the aircraft system and the human system, worked exactly as it was designed to. But here is the key. The warning came from the engine, and the engine on that particular 777 is the Rolls-Royce Trent 892, not a Boeing engine. Boeing did not design it. Boeing did not manufacture it. Boeing does not issue service bulletins for it, and Boeing does not overhaul or maintain it. So what happened over Moscow was an engine event, not a flight control event, not a software event, not an airframe design flaw. It is simply not in the same category as the 737 MAX crashes, even though the word Boeing appears in both headlines. And this is where a lot of public confusion begins, because unless you've worked in aviation or followed these cases closely, it's very easy to assume that the aircraft manufacturer is responsible for every system on the airplane. But that's not how modern aviation works. So let's take a moment to explain this properly, because once you see the separation, the entire picture becomes much clearer. When Boeing builds a 777, they build the airframe, the wings, the fuselage, the flight controls, the avionics integration, and the system's architecture. But they do not build the engines. Airlines can choose between 3 different engine options on the earlier 777 models: General Electric, Pratt & Whitney, or Rolls-Royce. Each of those engines is its own piece of engineering, with its own maintenance requirements, service bulletins, and failure modes. So, when a 777 has an engine event, the investigation almost always focuses on the engine manufacturer and the operator's maintenance environment, not Boeing. And we've seen this recently. The dramatic engine failure over Denver in 2021, United Flight 328, involved a Pratt & Whitney PW4077. A fan blade fractured due to metal fatigue. The FAA grounding that followed targeted that specific engine type, not the Boeing 777 as a whole. A similar thing happened in Japan in 2020, again involving a Pratt & Whitney fan blade. Investigators found fatigue, cracks, inspection intervals were updated, and certain engines were temporarily suspended from flying. Rolls-Royce engines have had their moments as well. It involved ice crystals forming in the fuel, restricting flow through the fuel oil heat exchanger. Rolls-Royce redesigned the component, and the issue disappeared. The pattern is very clear. Engine events get engine-based solutions. And that's why regulators treat these cases differently. When the 737 MAX failed, regulators grounded the entire aircraft type because the core issue was embedded inside the aircraft's own flight control logic. But when a 777 engine has a problem, regulators target that engine family, not the aircraft. The 777 airframe itself remains one of the most reliable and respected wide-body platforms in commercial service. So when we look back at the Red Wings incident, the most reasonable conclusion based on what we know so far is that this was an engine-related anomaly, not a Boeing structural or systems failure, not a MAX-type event, and not evidence that the 777 is unsafe. Now that we've separated emotion from engineering, let's talk about something even more important: aviation safety as a whole. When people see an engine warning, especially one described as a fire, it can sound terrifying. But from a technical standpoint, these events are both rare and highly survivable. Modern turbofan engines are designed with multiple layers of containment and temperature monitoring. If a component overheats, the crew is warned before the situation becomes dangerous. If a fan blade fails, the casing is designed to contain the debris. And if anything looks abnormal, the safest option is always to return to the departure airport while the aircraft is still in a stable condition. In the case of Red Wings 3097, that is exactly what happened. The aircraft leveled off, returned to Domodedovo, and landed without further issues. No structural problems, and no signs of airframe malfunction. In other words, the aircraft behaved exactly the way it was supposed to. And if we zoom out even further, the numbers tell the same story. Commercial aviation remains one of the safest forms of transportation on the planet. Engine warnings draw a lot of attention, but actual accidents, especially major ones, are extremely rare. Statistically, a passenger would have to fly every single day for thousands of years to experience a fatal accident. And despite the headlines, the vast majority of aviation incidents end just like this one: safely, professionally, and uneventfully from the standpoint of passenger outcomes. So yes, fear is understandable, it's human, but aviation doesn't run on fear. It runs on procedures, engineering, and continuous improvement. And the Red Wings case is a good example of those systems working exactly as intended. So let's return to that phrase. If it's Boeing, I'm not going. It's a powerful expression of how deeply the 737 MAX tragedies affected the public, and that emotion deserves respect. But applying that phrase to the Red Wings 777 fire warning, or to any engine event involving a Rolls-Royce or Pratt & Whitney engine, doesn't help us understand what actually happened. This doesn't mean you shouldn't feel cautious. Everyone processes risk differently. But as long as we continue discussing aviation honestly, it's important to place responsibility where it actually belongs. In this case, there is no evidence pointing toward a Boeing design flaw. The warning came from an engine built by another manufacturer, and the aircraft behaved exactly as expected when that warning appeared. And that's what we should focus on. What happened, what didn't happen, and why the outcome was safe. Thank you for watching, and for keeping the conversation thoughtful and informed. I'll see you in the next video.